Thank you all very much. Can everybody hear me okay? That means you don't have to eat quite as quietly. In talking with you all this morning, when I make these talks, most times I begin 20 years ago, when much of what my story is about took place. However, the one thing that I have learned is that if you do something wrong or make a mistake, or if you have an illness such as major depression and you get treatment, I want you to know that it sticks with you the rest of your life. It does. And I learned this because in 2005, in the Jeffrey McDonald case, one of his lawyers contacted me, and over coffee at Starbucks in Raleigh said to me that this lady who was found in South Carolina a number of years ago, Helena Stokely, who was a witness in the trial, and she said to a retired deputy United States Marshal who had told my friend the lawyer that he had driven her to Raleigh from Charleston. And then he told her he had driven her to Raleigh from Greenville. He didn't drive her from either city. But nevertheless, a motion was filed where it was alleged that she told me and the other prosecutors in that case that she was involved in the murders. And as a result of that, I said to her, well, Helena, if you testify that way tomorrow in court, I will prosecute you for murder. I said to my friend the lawyer, that did not happen. That's not true. I don't know how the systems of justice work in South Carolina, but you know what? It's still going on. And 8 years later, just a week ago, the defense asked for 30 more days to file a reply brief to the government. And the government is getting 30 more days after that to file a reply brief to the defendant. And the hearing in this took place last September. And everybody came to testify. I testified in federal court for 2 or 3 hours. Testifying in court is I don't know if any of y'all have ever done it, but it is not a lot of fun. Do you know the nicest words anyone has ever said to me in my life is, I don't have any more questions. And you're free to go. And I learned what it was like. I've learned what it was like to be a lawyer and a prosecutor and defense lawyer. I learned what it was like to be a client. And I learned what it was like to go to prison for 3 months. And I've learned now what it was like to be a witness. So I have sat in every possible chair that one can sit in at the courtroom except that of the judge, juror. The cross-examination, though, was not a lot of fun because, of course, it was personally severe against me in the mistakes that I'd made 20 years ago. I understood that, and I learned before I testified how I was going to handle myself. The federal courthouse in Wilmington, North Carolina is very long. They have these long hallways. And so for about an hour, I would walk by myself, up and down the hallway, talking to myself, giving myself a pep talk. And at the end, I decided what I would do, of course, was to tell the truth, but I would do so nicely. That's the key word, and graciously, and not object or argue, just be forthcoming. That was the way to get past it. That was the way to get over it. That is also the way, frankly, to get past anything that you've done that is a mistake. It is the way to get past mental illness. It is to be transparent. It is to be open. It's to let everybody know and not worry about what people think of you about it if you have something wrong with you. Because then the bottom line is, who cares? What difference does it make what everybody else in this room thinks about you if you're doing the best that you can, to get over something? It just doesn't make any difference. I was once a lawyer. I'd been a prosecutor. I'd been a defense lawyer. I'd been in a small firm. I'd been in a large firm. I had been in all kinds of environments. And I thought I had the world by the tail. I would come to CLE meetings. My eyes would glaze over at the speakers. I would leave early if I could. And so I was a typical lawyer. And so I thought I would always be one. Just like I bet you, every one of you thinks that you will always be one. And yet that was not my fate, which is not fate. It was something that I did to myself. It wasn't something someone else did. This is the first time I've made these presentations that the written materials that I give to you, frankly, are worth a darn. Because I wrote it, I didn't take a long time in writing it, but it's right to the point. It says exactly what I believe. And it says exactly what I think lawyers should know. As best I can say it, so I can't improve on that. So I'm not going to really go over those points, in my presentation today. But I would commend to you, it's only 7 pages long. It's short, but please read it if you have the chance. I don't know when I first realized something was not right. Maybe it was when my law partners came to see me and asked me to go see a psychologist. That would have been a clue. But, I was me, so I called somebody. They weren't taking new patients, which is what you get a lot of times. Well, most people would try a second doctor. I did not. I thought this was a hand from God, that I was not supposed to go see a psychologist, so I didn't go see or call anybody else. I should have done that, but I didn't. Another clue might have been when I got behind a lot, or when people were worried about whether I was returning their phone calls, or when I was manipulating funds from clients to other clients, or making stuff up and telling clients stories that were not true because to get them off my back, which some of us do from time to time, but I raised it, to an art form. Many of these things should have been clues to me that I was becoming a shell of what I had once wanted to be. And I must tell you, if I could have continued the shell for a longer period of time, I would have done so. And I would do so today. I would not voluntarily walk into an abyss today any more than I would do anything. But one morning, in January of 1993, a long time ago, it all came to a head. Two of my law partners, friends of mine, I'd been to law school with one of them, called me to their office and said, "Have you done these things, Jim?" Wrongdoing. And I said, "No." That was not true. I kept that up for about 10 minutes, but you can't keep it up for a very long time, particularly against a good lawyer. And so I finally said, "Well, Dick, if you will let me put my head down and rest it, when I wake up in 30 seconds, I will tell you the truth." What do you think somebody wants to happen in those 30 seconds? You want to die. You hope you'll be vaporized because you don't want to face what is ultimately coming. And so I left the law firm. I got in my car. I had a car telephone. I called a friend of mine. I'd met him during the McDonald trial. He was a defense lawyer for the McDonald case, Wade Smith. He was once one of the attorneys for one of the Duke lacrosse students several years ago. And we were friends. So I said, Wade, I need to talk to you. Can you see me right away? And he said, JB, have you done anything that's criminal? And I said, well, no. And I could have passed, a polygraph because I was in denial. He said, are you getting ready to leave town with a blonde? And I said, well, no. He said, well, good. We can handle anything else. And I want to tell you that's probably one of the best questions any lawyer has ever asked any client ever. Because what that says is it gives the client some hope. It reassures the client that all is not lost, or else you wouldn't ask such a silly question. And it makes you smile. And I learned as a client how nice it was to be able to smile. I really did. That would ultimately save me. We meet a couple of hours later at a restaurant. And that's where my venture into the world of mental health therapy began. Of all the decisions that you all have to make in your career, none is more hard, none is more difficult than the decision to seek counseling. None. Because it is very difficult to be able to go to see a doctor and tell that doctor the truth about yourself. That's just hard. It's hard for clients. It's hard for anybody. It's hard for your children. It's hard for anybody. So he said, Jim, I want you to go see a psychiatrist. I said, wait, I don't believe in psychiatry. I'm not going to go. He says, why not? I said, well, Wade, you can get a shrink to say whatever you want to say. He said, well, Blackburn, you can get to do the same thing with lawyers. I said, well, that's true. And he said, I want you to go see Jean Spaulding. I said, who is that? He said, she's the best psychiatrist I know. She's at Duke. She'll see you tomorrow. I said, well, I'm not going to go. He said, I'm making an appointment for you, which he did, and I canceled it. I was too busy. So the next day, Friday, everybody gets a little upset with me, and so I go to see her at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But before I go, her office is in Durham, which is about, 26 miles from here. It'd be like driving from here maybe to Charleston, And I don't know how you would like to go see a doctor. You'd probably like to go see someone with some confidentiality and some privacy. The law firm had my secretary follow me in a car from Raleigh to Durham to make sure I went. I go. A week or so later, another lawyer who's helping me, whom I've known for years, calls me to his office and says, Jim, I've just gotten a letter that's been faxed to us by the state bar. I said, what does it say? He says, it says they're going to file a motion against you in court, Superior Court, on Monday that would stop you from retaining any client funds. I said, they don't need to do that, Rick. I don't have any clients. This is not necessary. I'm already telling him what to do, He says, Jim, you can't stop this, and you can't stop the hurt that's getting ready to come to you. I said, oh, yes, I can. Don't you tell me I can't stop this. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, if I'm not here, it's moot. Well, this got everybody excited. And my plan was to get up. I didn't care about the Superior Court order. What I cared about was the News and Observer, the local newspaper, be like the State in Columbia, doing a story on it. That's what I was concerned about. I was concerned about all of you knowing all about me, which is why so many people do not seek help, because we are concerned and we are afraid of what you will think of us and the stigma that will be attached to us. That's why we don't do this. That's still the biggest hurdle and the biggest problem that we have. My plan was to go around the driveways of all streets in Raleigh on Tuesday morning and pick up all the newspapers. That sounds sort of silly, doesn't it? But you know, it seemed very plausible to me at the time. Well, they called me to their office. And I don't know how you would get somebody to go to a psychiatric hospital. You know, that's a hard thing to do. It's one thing to go see a psychologist. It's another thing to even go see a psychiatrist. It's one thing to take medication. But dear God, to go to a place where they lock the doors at night, you know, and take away your belt and your shoelaces and anything that you can shave with or kill yourself with, that's sort of tough. So I, of course, refused to go. I bet y'all would refuse to go too. How would you get a client to go to a doctor's office, a psychiatrist's hospital? What if one of your law partners called you in next week and said, you've been acting a little strange, you know, we want you to go? Or your family, or somebody does it. First of all, would you go? If you raise your hand and say yes, I would say no, you wouldn't. At least voluntarily. Y'all are old enough to remember the movie Arthur, aren't you? I did this once at Wake Forest, the law school. Do you know nobody had ever heard of the movie Arthur? They didn't know who Jeffrey McDonald was either, which really sort of ended my talk before I got started. So I'm there in Wade's office on a Saturday afternoon, you know, and Wade says, Jim, you remember the movie Arthur? I said, well, yes. He says, well, you know at the end of the movie where Arthur, who's the drunk, is supposed to get married to the rich girl. And he doesn't want to marry her. He wants to marry the poor girl, Liza Minnelli. And so he goes down there and he calls the wedding off. Tells the bride he's going to marry somebody else or he's in love with someone else, and he almost gets killed by her father-in-law, by her father. He stumbles out into the front of the church, you know, and says to them, I'm not going to be seeing you all anymore because I'm going to be poor. And I need to go to the hospital. And he falls down on the floor in his own church. Wade gets up in his office that Saturday afternoon and says, Jim, you are Arthur. This is what you need to say to everyone in Raleigh. He's just told me this story. You're not going to be seeing them anymore because you're not going to be practicing law anymore. You're going to be poor, and you need to go to the hospital. And then he falls down on the floor in his own law office. I get up, you know, I walk over where he's laying. I said, have you lost your mind? He said, Jim, I want you to consider going. I said, Wade, the only reason you want me to go to the hospital is you do not want me to kill myself while I am your client. It'd be bad for your reputation. He said, well, that's true. I said, I know. He said, okay, if I were to go, do you have any idea where I should go? He said, well, we've got beds ready for you on Monday in 2 hospitals. We're ready for you now. I said, well, where are they? He said, well, the first one is Durham County General Hospital. I said, well, what's the other one? He said, the other one is Duke University Hospital. So I said, well, do you think that this will be in the newspaper? Jim, I do. Well, then I want to go to Duke. Isn't it wonderful? He said, why? I said, Wade, it's clear. Duke is so much more prestigious and good sound in the paper. Even at the lowest moment of my life, I was worried about what other people would say. At the lowest moment, I was making an important decision in my life based upon what you would say. Isn't that stupid? But that was the way I was, and probably still am to some degree, if I'm totally truthful. So I go to Duke Hospital. I stay a week. I'd stayed longer, but insurance doesn't pay but for so much, so I was kicked out after a week. And I would go see Dr. Spaulding for 2 or 3 years. She's an excellent doctor. I would be on medication, of Prozac, 4 or 5 times the regular normal amount, and this would go on. She would diagnose me, and I write about this in my presentation, with basically an awful diagnosis. She said, Jim, I've only recommended 8 people in my career to be hospitalized. You were the 8th. And I said, that's great. She says, why? I said, well, I've always wanted to be the best. And so I wanted to be the sickest, you know. It's very strange, but that was the way my mentality worked. But in all honesty, what I want to talk with you all about, I went through a very large valley for a very, not a long time. It seemed like a long time, but it really was not a long time in the course of events. And what I want to say to you is this. I will never laugh or tease or think ill of anyone who ever seeks medical help like that again in my life. I think to go seek that kind of help is one of the most courageous decisions that any person can make. It was not courageous in my case because I had no choice. I was pushed into it. It's just that I learned that, you know, after the fact. But when we're on a downward path, when our world is coming to a close, if your world as a lawyer ended here in Kiawah tomorrow, and you went back home, and you could not practice law again, and everyone who knows you knows why, and everyone who knows you know what wrong things you've done, and everyone who knows you knows that you're seeking medical help. They even know the amount of prescription medication that you're on. They know how much it costs. They know how often you go see the doctor. And they know what her or his diagnosis of you is. If that's true, you may think that's awful. What I want to say to you is that is the sort of thing that everyone knew about me, and is also the thing that saved my life. Because here's the deal, folks. Once everybody knows about you, then they know. So what difference does it make? You think it makes a lot of difference, but they're just as messed up as you are in different ways, maybe not as public. Maybe they still keep on with their career or life, but everybody has issues. Everybody in this room has issues. One is the sun is not shining today. But we all have serious issues, some more than others. North Carolina averages 1 attorney suicide a month. South Carolina is not much better, but better. Every state in the United States is like that. This is not peculiar to North or South Carolina. Every time I've been asked to speak to lawyer groups in particular outside of the state, oftentimes it's on this subject for 2 reasons. One, it's a hard hour to get for credit for CLE, and that's one reason they want me to do it. The other, which I understand, but the other is because this is an issue with lots of folks. Everybody has issues and difficulties and adversities. And the thing that I learned was that in adversity, when it strikes, oftentimes you try to manage it or control it. You all may be better at this than I was. I was not able to control it very well. In fact, I couldn't control it at all. It just happened. And I had to go to the bottom before I would get better. The bottom for me happened in the summertime, about right now, in 1993. 20 years ago, this month. And I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon from my lawyers telling me that the local district attorney where I lived was going to seek an indictment against me in the grand jury the following week for wrongdoing. Well, I did not want this to happen, but I was powerless to stop it. The only thing I could control, I thought, was whether I was alive or dead. I thought that was the only thing I could control. And so I decided to be dead. But I didn't, obviously. And I was going to drive to Hilton Head and walk into the ocean. And so about 7 or 7:30, I go upstairs to the bedroom, second floor, and get the keys to my car. And I ran into my daughter, Stacy, who at that time had just turned 14. And she asked me where I was going. I said I was going for a drive. She said, "Well, Dad, would you like me to go with you?" I said, "Well, no. You can't do that." And she said, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "Well, if you must know, I thought I would go to the beach." And she said, "What is it that you think you're going to do when you get there?" Well, I thought, I might go for a swim. And she said to me, "Dad, if you do that, I will never forgive you. I have forgiven you a lot already, but I will not forgive you if you do that." I said, "Stacy, you don't understand. They said we're going to be poor. We have to sell the house. I'm going down. This way we won't have to sell the house." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I've got life insurance. It will pay off." And she said to me, "Dad, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard you say in my life." I said, "You don't understand. It's a lot of money. Money is not important, Dad. We love you. Don't even think about this." And then I said, "Stacy, it is a lot of money." And she sat there on the bed, and she looked at me, and she said, "How much money are you talking about?" I said, "Well, it's $600,000. She said, "Oh, my God, I had no idea. That's a lot of money. Sit down, let's talk about it. I may change my mind." That was the beginning of coming back. I did not know that at the time. Just looking back years later, I think that is clearly, the beginning of that. Because from that point on, I never thought that way again. I remember going to IHOP that night later with my friend Wade Smith, the lawyer. And we sat in a booth, and he got the menu, turned it on its flip side, and drew a line down the center of the page and said, "Guilty" on one side and "not guilty" on the other. I was looking at it upside down. I said, "Wade, how come it is that you're writing so much more in the guilty column than the not guilty column?" He said, "Jim, that's because you're guilty." I said, "Well, what the hell kind of lawyer are you?" He said, "Well, I'm one you're not paying any money to." I said, "That's true." I said, "Wait, I have been told all my life that women were attracted to men who've done something bad. Do you think this is true?" He said, "Jim, it is true. I'm thinking about doing something wrong myself." You will notice in your laughing these first 30 minutes, this was not a fun time. I'm not trying to say this was not a fun time. This was an awful time. It was awful. And the humor that I had was black. But there was humor. And I've told you some of the humor. My reason for telling you some of the humor is very purposeful. Not to make the hour go better and easier while we're here this afternoon, though I hope it does, but because I really do believe that gentle humor is one of the ways to cope with difficulties. It is one of the ways to cope with adversity. It is one of the ways to cope with staying alive. And you all know that. It's the way you cope in your practices to some degree, I would think. Well, the minister at the church where I went referred to this as magnificent defeat, which sounds like an oxymoron. But it stands for a simple principle. that we oftentimes somehow have to go to the bottom and give up and say we can't do it by ourselves and rely on a higher power to help us. And it can be faith. It can be scriptural faith. It can be faith in yourself, but some kind of faith. And that was essential and necessary for me to start over. Starting over and coming back doesn't happen all at once. It takes a long time. When you spend as long a time as I have screwing up, it takes a long time to come back. It just simply does. And everybody is not going to think you're wonderful. I wish that were so. I wish I could twinkle my nose and everybody would still think I was wonderful. That's not true. But you do meet new people. You meet friends that you did not know you had. And you find out how strong or weak you are. I think this. I believe that there are ways externally that each of you all here today can minimize the chances or the risk that you might, or your children, or your parents, or your friends might suffer from depression. It's not automatic. It's not easily preventable. But I think there are some things that you can do. Jean Spalding asked me 2 questions when I went to see her. The first was, when is the last time in your life you were carefree and happy? I said, well, it's probably when I was a junior in college, which is a long time ago. And she said, what, Jim, in your life do you think is in Technicolor? And what do you think is only in black and white? And I thought about that. And I have to be honest with you, I don't know that I had a great many Technicolor moments. I would tell you there's a third thing that I learned. Several years ago, I was making a speech to another group, and this lady at the back of the room raised her hand at the end, and she said, Mr. Blackburn, I want to ask you how you want to be remembered. Not when you're dead, but just now. How do you want people to think about you? I will think that way about after I leave here, today, what I want you all to think about hearing me speak for an hour. I think that each of you should ask the same question of yourselves in your own law practice, in your time as a parent, or as a spouse, or as a friend, or as a colleague, or whatever. I think that's a great question, how you want to be remembered. What is it you want people to say about you? And I think if you think about living your life in more bold color moments, trying to be as happy as you can, to live in the moment as possible, to be as open and transparent as you possibly can be, which is hard. It really goes against the grain of each one of us. It's hard. Then I think you have a shot at being a happy person. And if you're a happy person, probably you're an ethical person. There's a tremendous relationship between happiness and ethics that people don't see. It's not a standard, it's not a list of rules. It's the way you live your life. And to live it with some passion. Do you like the practice? I used to ask people if they love the practice of law. Nobody ever raised their hand. So I asked you, do you like the practice of law? And people do. But a lot of people say it's not as much fun as it used to be. That's what you always hear. Well, 20 years from now, they'll say the same thing about now. That just continues the way we go. I have really been struck by the fact that if I were you, I know it's not raining. I know it's raining today. It's not as pretty as you would like it to be. But if you would tweak it for just a moment Just tweak today for just a moment and think, isn't it cool this rain outside? How much fun is it to be in the rain? Have you ever walked in the rain? Not pouring rain, but gentle rain. And get your hair messed up. You know, don't look quite as cool and neat as you otherwise might. You know, it might make you smile when it's over with, or make you feel good that you did it. Have you ever said, thank God it's Tuesday? Somebody ought to start a restaurant. The most popular course that's taught at Harvard is an undergraduate course on the subject of happiness. It's a psychology course. And the professor has said that exercise, living financially within your means, but more importantly, not chasing money, not making that the thing that you want most in your career or life, and having some pleasure moments during the week as opposed to the weekend has a lot to do with being happy and not living for the future few days of the weekend. I try to do that today. I don't succeed all the time, but I try a lot more than I used to. During the McDonald hearing, my friend Wade Smith wrote an email to another colleague, a lawyer in Raleigh, talking about me. And he said, you know, Jim has done so well, but he has lived a different life, and he's made the best out of what he can in a hard scrabble sort of barren existence. Doesn't that sound awful? He has no idea. Because I am happy. Oh, it's true, I don't go to put my coat and tie on every morning, and I don't go to a law office every day, and that sort of thing. It's true I don't do that. But that's not the sole way to be happy. The way to be happy is to be who you are, whatever that happens to be. My journey in finding out who I was just took a long time and a lot of detours, some of which were awful, but all of which were self-inflicted. But if you don't give up, if you do not quit, if you keep on keeping on, eventually something good might happen to you. I'm a great believer in hold on, it will get better. You know, I don't know if you've seen some of these stories, but in the New York Times recently, the Washington Post, Newsweek magazine, all in the last 2 or 3 months, have had issues and articles and stories about suicide. And I say this, and I know this is a downer subject, and I won't dwell on it too long, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it for a moment, is that all of you all look great. Everybody's well dressed, had a nice lunch. But I don't know how each one of you all are, as you don't know really how I am. Twice since I've done programs, 2 folks, this may be a comment on the quality of my program, have killed themselves. One a paralegal, one a lawyer. One went to Myrtle Beach and jumped off a hotel, breaking up over with her boyfriend. The other, a paralegal, did not want to go to a psychiatric hospital. Both lost. Just remember, folks, if no one has died, everything can be fixed. Everything can be fixed. Maybe not the way you want it to be fixed, but it can be fixed if no one has died. Isn't that sort of what you might tell your kids? Not quite that dramatic, but the same line. We can fix things if you tell me the truth. You know? Isn't that true? Well, I used to think that the reason I didn't take my own life was because I thought I was special or I was tough or something like that. I don't know. I no longer think that's the reason, because this article in Newsweek had a story where this person who's a professor at Florida State, whose father was a Marine who killed himself, studied the issue of suicide. And he said he thought 2 or 3 characteristics had to all be present for like a perfect storm. And the first issue was aloneness, whether the person feels left out, at loose ends, lost, alone. The second was whether this person, it concluded, that he or she was a burden on people, not able to take care of themselves. And the third was the means by which to do it. And he said, you know, the truth is, on the means by which to do it, whether you are for or against gun control is irrelevant, because the ways of taking your own life are so many and so varied that the person who wishes to do it can find a way to do that. The most dangerous age group, are white men, middle age, in their 50s, when they don't feel quite as useful as they once did, you know, or maybe they've been let go from their business or company as they thought they were going to be there, or they have become sick, or they are unemployed. And one of the most safe groups was African Americans. And the reason for that, they said, was because of the great tradition that Afro-Americans have in church, you know, and scripture and homecomings and that kind of involvement in the community is what we all need. Nobody is an island like this. Or if you are an island, you know, it can cause trouble. And he told the story of this man who was walking in San Francisco to the Golden Gate Bridge. And before he walked, he left himself a note that said that if someone smiled at him, he would not jump. And no one smiled, and he jumped. Isn't that awful? So it's a very real, serious thing. But it doesn't have to be. But it's good that we bring it out into sunshine. It is not good to keep these things hidden. It is good to talk about mental health. It is good to talk about major depression. It is good to talk about medication. It is good to talk about psychiatry, because this is life. This is real, and we don't do ourselves any favor by keeping these things hidden. You know, I think the key for me was learning to be the opposite of what I once was. I learned to be open and somewhat transparent. Not all the time, and not as much as perhaps I should be, but a lot more than I used to be. I learned to live in the moment. I learned to control my urge to lash out and get angry sometimes. You know, I had all kinds of reasons during the McDonald hearing to lash out. I could say all sorts of things, you know, and how unfair I think that is. And, you know, it's just that way. The News and Observer ran several stories about it, and they had my picture in the paper lots of times. You know, I've just testified for 2.5 hours in federal court on a triple murder case on an issue of prosecutorial alleged misconduct, mine. Do you know what photograph the News and Observer, which is the Raleigh paper, had the next day? It had a picture of me when I was waiting tables at 42nd Street Oyster Bar. back in the 90s. Because lawyers who come out of state prison after 3 months don't have a lot of job opportunities. I don't know what your job opportunities are, but I'll bet you they're better than mine were. So I went to a friend of mine who owned this big seafood restaurant. I don't know what to compare it to in South Carolina. It's a big open restaurant. And I said, Brad, I used to go there a lot, with clients. I said, Brad, that's Brad. And he said, Brad, could I have a job? He said, doing what? I said, well, I was a lawyer. I'm smart. Can you make me a manager? He said, Jim, do you know how to fix iced tea? I said, no. Do you know how to make coffee? No. Do you know where to make the coffee? No. Well, then, Jim, you're not going to be a manager. I said, well, what can I do? He said, well, come back at 3 and we'll talk. I went back, and he said, we'll make you a host. I said, have any of y'all ever been a host at a restaurant? God almighty. And so I go back and I said, well, how much do hosts make? I don't know what y'all bill per hour, but I bet it's more than $6. And the $6 was before taxes. So anyway, I'm a host, and I do pretty well. And but one night, I had this green sport jacket that looked like I just, won the Masters. And so I'm wearing it that night with this pink tie and white shirt and khaki pants. And I think I'm just a dude, And so I'm taking this couple to their table. And I wasn't paying attention, but I looked at the lady. I said, well, tell me when your baby's due. And she said, well, I'm not pregnant. Now, most people, you'd leave it alone, wouldn't you? But you know how they tell lawyers don't ever ask the question you don't know an answer to? I said, well, no more hush puppies for you. That's how I became a waiter. I'm not telling you anything in secret. This story I testified to in federal court. And it comes into newspapers. It was on the online edition of the Los Angeles Times. So, I did that for a couple of years. But I will tell you, that is where I learned to come back. I learned to come back in a seafood restaurant, waiting tables for tips for all the people I had known before. Judges, lawyers, even some clients. And it started out by, isn't it sad that Jim's doing that? And about 2 weeks later, it morphed into, isn't it great that Jim's doing that? Maybe we can get a good table. It all changed. And what I learned was that people don't really mind too much what you're doing in life, so long as you're doing the best that you can. That's really important. And I learned there the importance of humility. I hate humility. But I learned how important it was. And I learned that I had to smile and be nice to people I did not like, who were not there for any good reason except to make my life miserable, or so I thought. I learned to feed everybody out of the same spoon, to treat everybody the same, because I could never tell who's going to leave the best tip, And I learned to laugh and enjoy myself and not care and not worry about what I looked like or the uniform that I wore, which was a red bow tie with suspenders and black pants. Had a stripe down the side. I was walking downtown one time. This guy comes up and he says, do you work in a hotel? I looked, what do you mean I work in a hotel? He said, well, you got stripes down your pants. I said, no. And so I learned to do that in a very public way. Your own path coming back from difficulty, adversity, might be very different from mine. But there's one strain that runs through everybody's coming back, and that is to pay attention to what Robert Frost once said. The shortest way out is through. The second one is Plato's great line that we need to be kind to everyone we meet because everybody is fighting a great battle. That's from the time of Plato. It's lasted all these years. So there must be some wisdom in what he says or in what Robert Frost has said. I am doing well today. I enjoy speaking. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy being here today. It is fun for me. Someone asked me one time, don't you get tired of telling these stories? I said, no, because every time there's a different group, it's different, and you meet new people and hopefully impact some. I know you get an hour of CLE from my speaking, and I know, I'm not sure whether it's ethics or the mental health, substance abuse, or whatever it is, but whatever it is, you'll get it, and it qualifies for the South Carolina Bar. But I hope that at least one of you, if not more, gets something more than just an hour of credit in all of this. I don't ask that you agree with me. I only ask that you think or consider and do what you know is best for you. I will tell you a story. I'm going to change it a little bit because of some things that happened the last several days. I always close my presentation with a story that happened to me in prison. It's about passion, or I call it about passion. But this past Tuesday, just 3 days ago, I decided I didn't want to go because it was early in the morning. It's at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I go to the men's breakfast at this church that I attend from time to time in Raleigh. It's only a mile from where I live, so not much reason not to go. So this particular day, they had this young person who's speaking this Sunday. And she got up to talk about the text that she is using, and she is telling the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And you all know the parable of the Good Samaritan. She goes through the book of Luke, and she goes through and reads several of the verses. And then she asks the question, who of the people in the parable do you most identify with? Is it the lawyer, you know, who asked the question of Jesus, how do I go through eternal life? And he says, you know, you need to love everybody and love your neighbor as yourself. And then the lawyer says, as a typical lawyer, says, and who is my neighbor? And there comes the parable. And then you have the parable, then you have the people in there you have the man on the ditch on the side of the road, you have the Levite and the priest, and you have the Samaritan, and then you have the innkeeper. All these characters. Who would you most identify with, was her question. Well, I remember turning to somebody at the table I was sitting with. I said, well, that's easy for me. He says, why? I said, I identify with the person in the ditch. I relate to the person in the ditch. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, let me tell you this story. On the first morning, after the first night that I was staying in the Wake County Jail one night, I'm being transported to another small town later that day for about 6 or 7 days for processing. And I'm standing there with the jailer, and my wrists are handcuffed. I'm wearing an orange jumpsuit. My legs are shackled. And I turned, and the jailer turns to me and says, Jim, I've got bad news for you. I said, what do you think this is? He said, no, I've got worse news. I said, what? He said, well, we've just gotten a phone call from the local television station that they want a cameraman, like Warren sitting back there, to come over and film you walking from the jail to the van. I said, can't you take these handcuffs off? He said, you know, I would if I could, but I can't. It's procedure. But then he felt sorry for me. He said, I'll tell you what, if your driver doesn't care, I'll, take them off. About that time, the driver walks around the side of the building, and he is the worst-looking person I've ever seen in my life. I don't think he's going to help me, so we don't speak. We walk in silence to the van. We get in the van. This is the side of the ditch, in this van, with a mesh between the front and the back seat, with no door latches that you can open the door. It's locked shut, and we're driving out of Raleigh. And we get about 2 or 3 miles down the road, and he pulls the van over to the side of the road and stops it. And he gets out, walks around, to my side, slides open the door, and he says, Mr. Blackburn, my wife knows who you are. And she knew I was going to drive you this morning. So she has made for both of us a special thermos of coffee. How would you like me to fix yours? And I said, well, however you got it, I'll drink it. And we sat on the side of the road there for 10 minutes or so, drinking coffee. His wife had made that morning. And the rest of the drive to where we were going, which was about an hour, he could not have been nicer. He answered every question I had, of which there were many. We get to the prison, and I go to the infirmary. I've changed clothes. I don't have the leg irons on anymore, but I still have another set of handcuffs on. So I go into the infirmary, and there's this young girl. She can't be over 21 or 2 years old. She looks at me, and she points a finger at me. I know who you are. You're that preacher, Jim Baker. She says, get up on this table. Let me take your blood pressure. And just so that you know, you cannot roll up your sleeves when you have handcuffs on. And so she does it for me. And as she does, she's taking my blood pressure, and she notices on the right side of my cheek, a tear slides down, and she takes her finger, and she wipes it away, and she says, you're under a little pressure today, aren't you, darling? If you want to get passion back in your life, if you want to feel good about yourself today, just today, or certainly Monday when you go to court and see somebody there who doesn't know what the world's going on, all you have to do is so easy, doesn't cost any money. All you have to do is just be nice to somebody who never knows your name. Thank y'all.